The champagne flute in Rose's hand was a crystal cage, trapping the effervescence of a life that felt increasingly like someone else's. From her vantage point on the sweeping marble terrace of the Blackwood estate, the party below was a masterpiece of curated opulence. Laughter, sharp and polished as the diamonds adorning throats and wrists, spiraled into the cool night air, mingling with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and old money. 200 people, Rose thought, her gaze drifting over the crowd. And not a single one of them would miss me if I vanished into the earth. It was a morbid thought, unbefitting the fiancé of Liam Blackwood, heir to the most powerful pack and fortune on the eastern seaboard. But it was the truth. Here, amidst the werewolf elite, she was a solitary sparrow who had accidentally flown into a flock of hawks. Her eyes, inevitably, found Liam. He held court by the roaring fire pit, his golden blonde hair catching the light, his smile a weapon of perfect, white charm. He was beautiful, there was no denying it, a storybook prince in a Brioni suit. But the way he clapped a rival alpha's son on the back was a little too hard, his laugh a fraction too loud. It was all about dominance, a performance she was only just learning to decipher. A shift in the air, a subtle reordering of the space around her, made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She didn't need to turn. She knew it was Dave. Liam's father stood a few feet away, a silhouette of contained power against the glittering backdrop of the city below. He wasn't watching the party. He was watching her. His gaze was a physical weight, a hunter's focus that made her breath catch. Where Liam was gilded sun, Dave was shadowed moon taller, broader, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his presence a silent command that needed no volume. "You find our festivities lacking, Miss Valerian?" His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder before a storm. It bypassed her ears and vibrated straight down her spine. She turned, forcing a polite smile. "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood. It's magnificent." His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, flickered over her face, missing nothing. He gestured with his own glass, not towards the people, but towards a stark, modern sculpture that dominated one corner of the terrace, a twisted knot of dark, polished metal. "You've been studying Arcanum's piece for the last 7 minutes. Most people find it unsettling." Rose's cheeks warmed. She hadn't realized he'd been watching that closely. Of course he was. He sees everything. "It's not unsettling. It's honest. It's about conflict. The tension between the form it was forced into and the shape it desperately wants to be." Dave took a step closer. The space between them crackled. He smelled of bergamot, fine leather, and something else, something wild and untamed, ozone and pine, the scent of a deep forest. "An art historian's perspective," he said, a ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile touching his lips. "Most of my guests see an expensive conversation piece. Then most of your guests aren't looking closely enough," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. This was the most he'd ever spoken to her. Their interactions were usually brief, formal nods at family dinners. This felt different, dangerous. "No," he agreed, his gaze intense. "They rarely do." For a heart-stopping moment, she felt like that sculpture seen, understood, stripped bare. He was looking at her, not at Liam's pretty, human accessory. He was looking at the mind that had earned a summa cum laude degree, at the resilience that had clawed its way out of a childhood of quiet poverty, at the woman who felt like an imposter in her own skin in this gilded world. Then the moment shattered. "Rose, there you are." Liam's voice was a jovial intrusion. He slid an arm around her waist, his touch proprietary. The spell was broken. Dave's expression shuddered, the brief connection severed as he gave his son a curt nod and melted back into the shadows from which he'd come. "Boring you with business talk, was he?" Liam chuckled, steering her away. "Come on, I've been looking for you everywhere. I have a surprise." Her heart, which had been thumping a wild, erratic rhythm, settled into a dull, familiar ache. This was her life, a series of beautiful interruptions from the profound to the mundane. "A surprise?" she asked, allowing herself to be led through the throng of guests. "You'll see." His grin was boyish, but his eyes held a predatory gleam that made her stomach clench. He led her away from the main terrace, towards the private wing of the estate, his steps quick with excitement. "It's in your father's West Wing study?" she asked, confusion prickling. That part of the house was strictly off-limits during parties. "He's occupied, and what's his is mine, eventually, right?" Liam winked, his arrogance a shield she used to find charming. Now, it just felt brittle. He pushed open the heavy oak door to the study, a room she'd only ever glimpsed, a sanctuary of dark wood. towering bookshelves, and the scent of Dave's particular cologne. It felt like a violation to be here, but the room was empty. Liam, I don't understand. His grin widened. Not here, upstairs, in the sitting room. I left it there. I wanted you to open it somewhere private. He kissed her forehead. Go on. I'll grab us some more champagne. Meet you there in 2 minutes. He was being sweet, conspiratorial, the Liam she'd fallen for. The ache in her chest softened. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe the pressure of this world is getting to me. She nodded, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that evening. Okay, 2 minutes. She took the back staircase, her fingers trailing over the cool, polished banister. The sounds of the party faded, replaced by the hushed silence of the private quarters. The door to the upstairs sitting room was slightly ajar, a soft golden light spilling into the hallway. He got me a gift. He remembered. Her heart lifted with a fragile hope. Perhaps this was the turning point. Perhaps tonight, he would finally feel like hers again. She pushed the door open. The scene that greeted her was not a wrapped box or a bouquet of flowers. It was a tableau of such brutal, intimate betrayal that the air was physically punched from her lungs. There, on the silk divan her future father-in-law had imported from Milan, was Liam, and beneath him, her head thrown back in a throaty moan, her dress a pool of crimson on the floor, was Violet, her sister. Rose's world did not so much shatter as it simply stopped. The sounds, the wet, frantic sounds of their kissing, the rustle of fabric, Liam's low growl of pleasure reached her as if from the end of a long, dark tunnel. Her vision tunneled, focusing on a single, horrifying detail, the familiar birthmark on Violet's shoulder, the one she'd traced as a child when they'd shared a bed during thunderstorms. No. This isn't happening. Liam pulled back, his lips swollen, his eyes glazed with lust. See, Vi? I told you. Nothing compares to a wolf. His voice was thick, arrogant. A human can never truly satisfy the primal urge. Violet giggled, a sound Rose had once found endearing. Now it was the scrape of a knife against bone. Poor Rose. She tries so hard to play the part, doesn't she? But she'll always be just that. A player. A temporary distraction. The words landed, not as an insult, but as a verdict. Rose took a step back, her body moving on autopilot. The floor felt unsteady beneath her feet. She was a ghost in the hallway, a spectator to the evisceration of her own life. Liam nuzzled Violet's neck, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that Rose's traitorously sharp hearing caught perfectly. Don't worry about her. After we're married and I have full control of the trust, I'll put her aside. You're the one I want. You understand our world. Married. Control. Put her aside. The phrases echoed in the hollowed-out cavern of her mind. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. She was a business transaction. A stepping stone. The fragile hope she'd felt moments ago curdled into something cold, hard, and sharp in her chest. It was a shard of ice, freezing the tears before they could fall, numbing the raw, screaming pain. She turned away from the door. The sounds from the room faded, replaced by a roaring in her ears. She walked back down the hallway, her steps eerily silent and precise. She descended the stairs, her hand gripping the banister not for support, but to feel something, anything, other than this all-consuming void. She reached the bottom step and stood there, alone in the dim corridor. From the terrace, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted in, a cruel mockery of the life she thought she had. The ice in her chest spread, crystallizing into a single, diamond-hard purpose. You think I'm a player, Liam? A temporary distraction? Her eyes lifted, scanning the shadows of the main terrace until they found him. Dave Blackwood. Standing alone, a king surveying his domain, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His powerful form was a silhouette of absolute, unassailable authority. You think you can discard me? A slow, dangerous smile touched Rose's lips. It felt foreign on her face, a predator's expression she didn't know she possessed. Fine. If it's a primal world you want, Liam, I'll learn to play by its rules. You took everything from me, so I'll take everything from you. Starting with him, the world had not ended. It had simply narrowed to a single, cold point of focus, like a blade being sharpened on a whetstone. Rose stood in the corridor, the sounds of the party a distant, meaningless hum. The raw, screaming pain was there, a live wire flaying her from the inside, but she refused to let it touch her. Not yet. Not now. She wrapped the ice in her chest around it, a glacial shield. Breathe in, breathe out. The instructions were clinical, a mental triage. Do not fall apart here. Do not give them the satisfaction. She could still smell them, Liam's sharp citrus and musk cologne mingled with Violet's cloying, expensive perfume. The scent was a brand on her memory. She forced herself to stand straighter, to unclench her jaw. Her reflection in a dark, gilded mirror on the wall was a stranger. Pale, eyes wide and dark with a storm no one else could see. But her posture was ramrod straight. A queen, not a victim. He will not break me. The thought was a vow, whispered in the fortress of her mind. She will not break me. But a vow was not enough. A shattered heart was not a weapon. It was a liability. She needed a plan, a real one, not a fleeting fantasy of screaming or throwing a drink, but something systemic, something that would make Liam feel a fraction of the hollow, eviscerating betrayal she felt now. He had taken her love, her trust, her future, her family. He had exposed her as a fool in a world where foolishness was a death sentence. What does he value? The question was a cool, analytical drip in the chaos of her mind. His status, his inheritance, his father's approval. The answer presented itself with terrifying, inevitable clarity. Dave, the alpha, the source of all Liam's power and the heart of his insecurity, the man whose gaze felt like being truly seen for the first time, the most dangerous man in the room. The risk was astronomical. Dave Blackwood was not a man to be manipulated. He was a predator who had built an empire on the bones of his rivals. To approach him with a hidden agenda was to walk into a wolf's den wearing raw meat as jewelry. He would see through her, he would destroy her. But what was left to destroy? The thought was strangely liberating. She was already in ruins. There was a terrifying freedom in having nothing left to lose. Her eyes found him again through the archway. He had moved to the edge of the terrace, his back to the party, looking out over the city lights as if they were stars in a kingdom he owned. He stood with an innate stillness that was more powerful than any gesture of Liam's flamboyant dominance. This was the true power. Not the heir, but the king. If I can win his favor. The thought was audacious, a spark in the tinderbox of her rage. If I can make him look at me, not as his son's fiancé, but as something else, it would be the ultimate humiliation for Liam, to be supplanted in his father's eyes by the temporary distraction. It would strike at the very core of his identity. It was a plan born of madness and desperation, but it was the only one she had. She took a final, steadying breath, the ice in her veins solidifying into resolve. She would need to be smarter, sharper, and more controlled than she had ever been in her life. She would need to become a predator in a world of them. She walked back onto the terrace. The air, once heavy with perfume and pretense, now felt charged, every sense heightened. She could pick out individual conversations, the clink of a specific glass, the shift of fabric as people turned to look at her. Their pity was a palpable thing, a sticky web she refused to be caught in. They knew. Of course they knew. The pack would have heard the whispers, smelled the betrayal on the air. She ignored them all. Her path was a straight line to the bar. "A glass of Macallan," she said to the bartender, her voice remarkably even. "Neat." She felt the weight of stares. Let them look. Let them see the woman Liam had betrayed, drinking his father's favorite whiskey. It was a statement. Her first move in a game she was only just learning to play. The whiskey was a fire in her throat, a welcome burn that grounded her. She turned, leaning against the bar, and let her gaze sweep the crowd with a new, detached curiosity. She was no longer a participant, she was a strategist. Her eyes landed on Liam and Violet, who had finally emerged from their den. They stood near the fire pit, Violet's arm possessively linked through his. She was glowing. The victorious sister, the new queen of the ashes. Liam's eyes met Rose's across the distance. He had the decency to look momentarily startled. Then his expression shifted to one of defensive arrogance. "Look at me," she thought, holding his gaze, her own devoid of the tears he undoubtedly expected. "See what you have created." She took another slow sip of the whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. She simply observed him, as if he were a mildly interesting specimen under glass. His arrogance began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. Good. A large presence materialized beside her. The air thickened, charged with the scent of ozone and pine. "That's a serious drink for a celebration," Dave Blackwood's voice rumbled, low enough for only her to hear. Rose didn't turn immediately. She finished her observation of Liam, letting a small, cold smile touch her lips before she slowly shifted her attention to the alpha. His proximity was a physical shock. He was so much larger up close, his power a barely leashed force that vibrated the space between them. His whiskey-colored eyes were not confused. They were knowing. They saw the ice in her soul, the calculation in her gaze. Some celebrations call for a funeral dirge, not a fanfare, she said, her voice quiet but clear. She swirled the whiskey in her glass. I find the smoke in peat, clarifying. It cuts through the sweetness in the air. Dave's gaze intensified. He was studying her, his head tilted slightly, as if she were a complex piece of that unsettling sculpture they'd discussed. He wasn't offering condolences. He was assessing a change in the weather. Clarity is a rare commodity in this world, he replied, his eyes drifting from her to his son, then back to her face. Most prefer the comfort of the fog. I'm done with comfort, Rose said, and the truth of it rang in every syllable. She met his gaze fully, refusing to be the first to look away. It was a challenge, a declaration. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a kind expression. It was the look of a hunter who had just spotted worthy prey. Are you? He murmured, the words a low growl that she felt in the pit of her stomach. That is a very dangerous thing to be, Miss Valerian. Before she could reply, Liam was there, his presence an unwelcome jolt of chaos. Rose, there you are. I've been looking for you. His voice was too loud, too forced. He glanced nervously between her and his father. Is everything all right? Dave didn't even look at his son. His eyes remained locked on Rose. We were discussing the merits of clarity, he said, his tone deceptively mild. Your fiancé was just telling me she's developed a taste for it. Liam flinched as if struck. The power dynamic was so blatant, so brutal, it was almost beautiful. Dave had just drawn a line in the sand, and he had placed Rose deliberately on his side of it. The game was on. And as Dave gave her one last, lingering look before turning to greet another guest, Rose knew, with a terrifying, thrilling certainty, that he knew she was playing. The only question that remained was which one of them was the predator and which was the prey, because the look in his eyes promised that whatever she had started tonight, he was more than ready to finish it. The silence in Rose's apartment was a physical presence, thick and heavy with the ghost of a life that had died on that silk divan. Sunlight, bright and cruelly cheerful, streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was the morning after, and the world had the audacity to keep turning. She hadn't slept. She had sat in the same armchair all night, the events of the party playing on a relentless loop behind her eyes. But it wasn't the image of Liam and Violet that haunted her now. It was the memory of Dave Blackwood's gaze, the knowing, assessing weight of it, the predatory interest. That is a very dangerous thing to be, Miss Valerian. The ice in her chest had not melted. It had crystallized, forming a new, harder skeleton within her. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. It was a weakness her enemies would exploit. Enemies. The word felt foreign, dramatic, but it was accurate. Liam and Violet were no longer her fiancé and her sister. They were adversaries. And Dave. Dave was the battlefield. She stood, her body stiff, and walked to her laptop. The familiar click of the keys was a sound of purpose, a first step out of the ruins. She pulled up the Valerian and Blackwood corporate website. Liam's family invested in everything from tech to real estate, but their passion project, their public-facing crown jewel, was the Blackwood Foundation for the Arts. Of course, she thought, a grim smile touching her lips. It was the perfect, civilized veneer for a pack of wolves, and it was her way in. She found what she was looking for, the upcoming Modern Mythos Gala, a fundraiser centered around art inspired by folklore and the primal. It was in 3 weeks. The centerpiece was to be a newly acquired, fiercely contested sculpture by a reclusive artist, a piece the foundation had won at a Sotheby's auction. The press release was vague, but the art world whispers weren't. It was a masterpiece, and she, Rose Valerian, with her master's thesis on primal archetypes in postmodern sculpture, was arguably one of the few people in the city qualified to write the definitive curatorial note for it. A note that would be printed in the gala program, read by every major donor, and most importantly, approved by the foundation's chairman, Dave Blackwood. This was her move. Not a desperate phone call, not a tearful confrontation, a professional proposal, a display of the very intellect he had seemed to appreciate. She would make herself invaluable, not as a scorned woman, but as an asset. She spent the day crafting the email. Every word was chosen with the care of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. It was polite, respectful, and impeccably credentialed. She referenced their brief conversation about the Arcanum piece, framing it as an inspiration. She attached her CV and a link to her published thesis. She was not asking for a favor. She was offering a service he would be a fool to refuse. She hit send as the sun began to set, the click of the mouse echoing in the silent apartment. The die was cast. The response came not in 3 days, but in 3 hours. It was not from an assistant. From David Blackwood. Subject: Curatorial proposal for modern mythos gala. Monsieur Valerian, your timing is notable. I am reviewing the acquisition. It is a complex piece. Your thesis makes for compelling reading. Be at my office at Blackwood Tower. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. Do not be late. D.B. The message was pure Dave. Terse, commanding, and layered with unspoken meaning. Your timing is notable. He knew. Of course he knew. This was not a blind business proposal. This was the first move in their game, and he was acknowledging it. The next day, Rose stood before the monolithic Blackwood Tower, a shard of obsidian glass spearing the afternoon sky. She had dressed not for a seduction, but for a negotiation. A tailored, navy sheath dress, her hair pulled back in a severe knot, minimal makeup. She was not here as Liam's cast-off. She was here as Rose Valerian, art historian. The lobby was a cathedral of cold, polished granite and silent efficiency. His personal assistant, a severe-looking woman with sharp eyes, met her and escorted her to a private elevator that required a keycard. The ascent was swift, silent. The doors opened directly into his office. It was not an office. It was a lair. The entire far wall was glass, offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the city. The room itself was vast, sparsely furnished with pieces that were both modern and timeless. A desk of reclaimed ebony, low-slung leather sofas, a single, brutalist bookshelf, and on a pedestal in the center of the room, covered with a black cloth, was the sculpture. But her eyes were drawn to the man standing before the window, his back to her, Dave Blackwood. He wore a dark gray suit that did nothing to conceal the powerful breadth of his shoulders. He didn't turn as she entered. "Close the door, Miss Valerian." His voice was the same low rumble. But here, in this space that was so intrinsically his, it held a different weight. It was a command that vibrated in the air. She pushed the heavy door shut, the click of the latch sounding like a finality. He turned slowly. His gaze swept over her, from her practical heels to her composed face. It was a thorough, dispassionate assessment that felt more intimate than any lover's glance. He didn't offer a seat. "You proposed a professional relationship," he stated, walking toward the covered sculpture. "Yet we both know your presence here is anything but professional." Rose's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm here because I am the best person to write about that piece. My personal life is irrelevant." A dark eyebrow lifted. "Is it?" He stopped before the pedestal. "You believe you can compartmentalize? That the betrayal you suffered last night can be locked away in a box while you deconstruct the symbolism of bronze and wire?" He was stripping her bare, and he was doing it without raising his voice. "I believe my work speaks for itself," she said, her voice admirably steady. "Your work is impressive," he conceded, his hand resting on the black cloth. "But I am not interested in your work right now. I am interested in your motive. Look me in the eye, Rose, and tell me this request has nothing to do with my son." The use of her first name was a shock, a deliberate breach of protocol. It was a challenge. Predator and prey. He was forcing her to either lie and be exposed as a coward, or tell the truth and be exposed as a schemer. She met his gaze, the whiskey-colored eyes that saw too much. The ice in her chest held. She would not flinch. "Everything I do from this moment forward," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "has everything to do with your son." The admission hung in the air between them, stark and dangerous. A slow, approving smile touched Dave's lips. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who respected a good gamble. "Finally," he murmured. "A measure of that clarity you claim to value." His fingers tightened on the cloth. "You want this job? Then prove you understand what you're dealing with. Not with art, with us." With a sharp pull, he yanked the cloth away. Rose's breath caught. The sculpture was not bronze. It was welded steel and obsidian, a terrifyingly beautiful depiction of a massive wolf locked in a brutal struggle with a sleek, powerful hawk. Their bodies were intertwined, a vortex of violence and grace. The wolf's jaws were clamped around the hawk's wing, but the hawk's talons were dug deep into the wolf's shoulder. It was a battle with no victor, only a breathtaking, terrible balance of power. It was the most primal, savage thing she had ever seen in a gallery. "The piece is called Bloodright," Dave said, his voice a low growl beside her. He was close now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The artist is one of us. It is not a metaphor, it is a memory." He turned his head, his eyes burning into hers. "So, tell me, art historian, what do you see?" This was the test. Not of her knowledge, but of her soul. Did she see a pretty symbol, or did she see the truth? Rose looked from the trapped wolf to the trapped hawk, her mind reeling. She saw the fury, the desperation, the inextricable link between predator and prey. She saw her own rage, and Liam's entrapment in his gilded cage, and the terrifying, beautiful man standing beside her who commanded it all. She saw him. "I see a choice," she whispered, her eyes still fixed on the struggling beasts. "The wolf can let go and lose its meal. The hawk can let go and lose its freedom. But neither of them will. Because the fight is all that's left. It's the only thing that makes them feel alive." The room was utterly silent. She could hear her own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the cage of her ribs. She felt his hand then, not on her body, but on the back of her neck. His fingers were warm, his grip firm, possessive. It wasn't a sexual gesture. It was primal. An alpha establishing contact, asserting dominance. A shockwave of pure, undiluted sensation shot through her, paralyzing and exhilarating. "Then we understand each other," Dave Blackwood said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper in her ear. "The job is yours. Welcome to the fight, Rose." And as his hand remained on her neck, branding her, Rose knew with terrifying certainty that she had just stepped into the wolf's jaws willingly, and a treacherous, hungry part of her never wanted to be free. Dave's hand fell away from her neck, but the phantom imprint of his touch remained, a brand of heat and possession. The air in the vast office was charged, thick with the unsaid things that now hung between them. The sculpture, Bloodright, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a silent, snarling witness to their pact. "The gala is in 19 days, Dave said, his voice returning to its businesslike cadence as he moved behind his desk. The shift was jarring. The primal alpha was gone, replaced by the billionaire CEO. "You will have full access to the Foundation's digital archives and the physical piece. You will report directly to me. No one else. Report directly to me." The words were a promise and a threat. It was the isolation she needed, the proximity she craved for her plan, but it also meant she was utterly alone with him. There would be no buffer, no witness. "Understood," Rose said, forcing her voice to remain level. She clutched the sleek, silver data drive he had given her. It felt heavy, a key to a kingdom she intended to plunder. "My assistant, Alara, will see you out." He didn't look up from the tablet he'd picked up, already dismissing her. The audience was over. Alara, the severe woman from before, was waiting by the elevator. Her gaze was a swift, assessing sweep that missed nothing. She didn't speak as the elevator descended, but the silence was louder than any accusation. This woman was loyal to Dave, a sentinel at the gate. She would be an obstacle. Back in the sterile silence of her apartment, Rose plugged the drive into her laptop. The files that opened were a treasure trove, high-resolution images of Bloodright from every angle, the artist's cryptic and intensely private notes, the astronomical bidding history. But it was the artist's biography that made her blood run cold. Kaylin, the file read. Born 1972, rural Montana. Disappeared 2005. Presumed deceased. The attached photograph was grainy, but the eyes were unmistakable, the same feral gold as Dave's when his control slipped. "One of us," he'd said. It wasn't a metaphor. The artist had been a werewolf. This sculpture wasn't just inspired by the primal, it was a self-portrait. She worked for hours, the city lights blinking on outside her window, her own reflection a pale ghost superimposed over the snarling wolf on her screen. She was weaving the artist's torment, Dave's implicit warning, and her own seething betrayal into the curatorial note. It was the best work of her life, because it was written in her own blood. A sharp knock on her door shattered her focus. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Dave?" The thought was immediately followed by a surge of fear. It was too soon. She wasn't ready. She peered through the peephole. The air left her lungs in a cold rush. Liam stood in the hallway, his handsome face a mask of contrite anger. He has the audacity, she thought, the ice in her chest cracking with the force of her fury. He has the goddamn audacity to come here. She considered not answering. But hiding was the act of prey. She was a player now. She unlocked the door and opened it, not fully, just enough to frame herself in the doorway. A barrier. "Rose," he began, his voice dripping with a practiced sorrow that made her stomach turn. "We need to talk. What happened? It was a mistake. A terrible, drunken—" "Save it, Liam." She cut him off, her voice flat. "I have work to do." His eyes narrowed, the contrition evaporating to reveal the petulant air beneath. "Work? What work? You quit the gallery." "I'm consulting for the Blackwood Foundation, on the modern mythos' acquisition." She let the words hang, watching his face. She saw the confusion first, then the dawning comprehension, and finally, the raw, incandescent jealousy. "You're— what?" he sputtered. "You went to my father? After what happened? What did you do, run to him crying?" The laugh that escaped her was short and harsh. "Crying? No, Liam. I proposed a business arrangement." He accepted. "It seems he values my professional opinion. Something you never bothered to acquire." His face flushed a mottled red. He took a step forward, his body crowding the doorway. The faint, citrus and musk scent of him, once so familiar, now made her nauseous. "You have no idea what you're playing at, Rose. He's not some patron of the arts you can charm. He's a wolf. He'll eat you alive and pick his teeth with your bones." "Is that a threat?" she asked, tilting her head. "Or a confession? Because from where I'm standing, the only one who's tried to devour me is you." His control snapped. His hand shot out, not to hit her, but to grip the doorframe, his knuckles white. His eyes flashed, a brief, terrifying shimmer of gold. "You will cancel this. You will call Alara and tell her you're too emotionally distraught to continue. You will walk away from my family." The command in his voice, the assumption of authority, was the final spark. The ice in her chest shattered, and what poured out was pure, unadulterated fire. "Your family?" she hissed, leaning into the space between them, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You lost any claim to dictate my actions the moment you put your hands on my sister. You don't get to tell me what to do. You are nothing to me now. A mistake I'm in the process of correcting." She saw the blow land, saw the genuine shock in his eyes. He had expected tears, pleading. He had not expected this forged steel version of her. "Correcting?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, her gaze unwavering, "that if I'm going to be in a world of wolves, I'd rather learn from the alpha than the pup." She saw the pure, unadulterated hatred then. It was a beautiful, terrifying thing. She had struck the exact nerve she'd intended. "You bitch," he snarled, the wolf rising to the surface, contorting his features. "You think you can play this game? You're a human. A fragile, weak little human. He will destroy you." "Maybe," Rose conceded, a slow, cold smile spreading across her lips. It was the same smile she'd given him at the party, the one that unnerved him. "But he'll do it looking me in the eye, which is more than you ever did." Before he could respond, she slammed the door in his face. The sound was a gunshot of finality. She engaged the deadbolt, her hands trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. She heard a guttural roar of frustration from the other side, followed by the sound of something his fist, perhaps connecting with the wall. Then, pounding footsteps fading away, she leaned against the door, her heart hammering a wild, triumphant rhythm. She had drawn first blood. She had gotten under his skin, exactly as she'd planned. But as her breathing slowed, the reality of his warning seeped in. "He will destroy you." She pushed away from the door and walked back to her laptop. The screen still showed the tangled, brutal beauty of Bloodright, the wolf and the hawk, locked in their eternal savage dance. She was in the wolf's den now. There was no going back. And the most terrifying part was, as she traced the line of the wolf's powerful jaw on the screen, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to. The Blackwood Foundation's archives were housed in a temperature-controlled sub-basement of the tower, a silent, hallowed space that smelled of old paper, ozone, and immense wealth. Rose had been granted access, but the air itself felt watchful, as if the building was aware of the intruder in its midst. She had spent the morning surrounded by the physical ephemera of Kalen's torment sketches on napkins, journals filled with frantic script that spoke of the moon's pull and the curse of a dual nature. It was one thing to theorize about primal archetypes. It was another to hold the evidence of a real werewolf struggle in her hands. The reality of the world she was infiltrating was becoming terrifyingly tangible. A soft chime echoed in the silent room, making her jump. The intercom on the wall lit up. "Miss Valerian," Alara's voice was clipped. "Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in the viewing gallery. Now, now." The word was a command, not a request. Her pulse, which had just settled, kicked into a gallop. This was it. The first real test. The viewing gallery was on the penthouse level, a stark, white cube of a room with a polished concrete floor. The only thing in it was blood-right, now dramatically lit from above, its shadows stretching and deepening the sculpture's inherent violence. And standing before it, once again with his back to her, was Dave. He didn't turn as she entered. "Close the door." She did, the sound sealing her in with him and the embodiment of his world's savagery. "Your preliminary notes," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile space. "They are technically proficient, academically sound." He finally turned, and his expression was unreadable, and utterly devoid of the piece's truth. Rose's spine stiffened. "I wrote what the evidence suggests." "The evidence," he repeated, a dark amusement in his tone. He began to circle the sculpture, and by extension, her. "You've read the journals. You've seen the bids. But you're still looking at it through a human lens. You see conflict. You see metaphor." He stopped directly opposite her, the snarling wolf between them. "You don't feel it." "Feel what?" she challenged, her pride stung. "The hunger." The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. "Come here, Rose." It was not a request. It was a summons, a predator calling its prey closer. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to maintain the distance. But to do so would be to admit fear, to lose. She walked around the sculpture until she was standing beside him, so close she could feel the heat of his arm next to hers. The sculpture was even more imposing up close. You could see every welded seam, every sharpened edge. "Look at the wolf," he commanded, his voice a low murmur that vibrated in her bones. "Don't analyze it. Feel it. What is the first, most base instinct? Before loyalty, before pack, before love. What is it?" She stared at the powerful musculature, the bared fangs, the absolute focus in its obsidian eyes. "To hunt," she whispered. "To feed," he corrected, his voice dropping, taking on a gravelly texture. "The hunger is the core of it, the relentless, gnawing need that defines every action, every thought. It is a pain, here." He tapped his own sternum, a hard, definitive gesture, a constant, aching emptiness that only one thing can fill. His eyes were locked on the sculpture, but she knew he was no longer seeing it. He was speaking of himself, of his kind. "Now look at the hawk," he said, his gaze shifting. "It is not just fighting for freedom, it is fighting because it is prey. It knows, in its hollow bones, that it is food. Its entire existence is a reaction to that knowledge. A beautiful, desperate dance on the edge of the abyss." He turned his head, and his eyes, now blazing with that faint feral gold, pinned her to the spot. "Which one are you, Rose? Did you come here to feed the hunger? Or are you just dancing on the edge, hoping you can fly away before you're caught?" The question was a trap. To claim to be the wolf was arrogance, a lie he would scent immediately. To admit to being the hawk was to show her throat. She lifted her chin, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "I don't know yet." A slow, dark smile spread across his face. It was the most genuine expression she had seen from him. He appreciated the honesty. Or the recklessness. "Good," he rumbled. "That is the first honest thing you've said since you walked into my office." He took a step closer, eliminating the last of the space between them. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical force, pressing in on her from all sides. She could see the individual threads of his charcoal suit, the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the dark dilation of his pupils. "Let me give you your first lesson then," he said, his voice so low it was almost a thought in her own mind. "In our world, there is no neutral ground. You are either rising or you are falling. You are claiming or you are being claimed. There is no in-between." His hand came up, but again, he didn't touch her. He gestured to the space between their bodies, a mere inch of charged air. This is a battlefield, and every second you stand your ground, you are making a claim. You are telling me you are not prey." Rose couldn't breathe. She was drowning in the intensity of him, in the raw, primal truth he was exuding. This was no longer a game of corporate manipulation. This was something ancient, something fundamental. "And if I am making a claim," she forced out, her voice breathless. "What are you doing?" The gold in his eyes flared. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of stark, predatory intent. "I am deciding," he said, the words a soft, deadly growl, "whether to acknowledge your challenge or to end it." He held her gaze for a moment longer, the promise and the threat perfectly balanced, just like the sculpture between them. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the gallery, leaving her alone with the snarling wolf, the trapped hawk, and the terrifying, exhilarating realization that the first lesson was over, and she had never been more alive or more afraid in her entire life. The city below Dave Blackwood's office was a sprawling tapestry of light, a human world that seemed impossibly distant from the primal truth still echoing in Rose's mind. Hunger, prey, claim, the words were a mantra, rewriting her understanding of everything. She had stayed in the viewing gallery for a long time after he left, her body thrumming with the aftershock of his presence. The confrontation with Liam had been a skirmish of wills. This with Dave felt like a tectonic shift in her very soul. He wasn't just a man to be seduced, he was a force of nature to be weathered, and the storm was intoxicating. A text buzzed her phone, shattering the silence. An unknown number. The message was stark. "The note requires revisions. My residence, 8 p.m. Below it was an address in the most exclusive, secluded part of the hills. It was from him. Of course it was. No greeting, no signature. A command. And a violation of every professional boundary she'd pretended to maintain. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, traitorous rhythm. This was the next move. Deeper into the wolf's territory. Into his home. "Don't go," a voice of reason whispered. "This is how people disappear." But the ice in her chest, now fused with a new thrilling heat, silenced it. To refuse was to show fear, to be prey. She arrived at 8:02, her 2-minute lateness a tiny, defiant act of control. The house wasn't a house. It was a modernist fortress of glass and steel, cantilevered over the canyon as if defying gravity. It was beautiful and severe, just like its owner. Dave himself opened the massive ironclad door. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie. The sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the powerful, corded muscles of his forearms and the faint, silvery tracery of old scars. He looked more dangerous, more real, than he ever had in his corporate armor. "You're late," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't sound angry. He sounded expectant. "Traffic," she lied smoothly, stepping past him into the entryway. The interior was a revelation. It was all clean lines, soaring ceilings, and dark wood. One entire wall was glass, opening onto an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the lights of the city below, but it was devoid of personal touches. No family photos, no sentimental art. It was the lair of a man who had stripped his life down to its essential elements. Power, control, the view. He led her not to a study, but to a vast living area where a fire crackled in a granite hearth. A single printed copy of her curatorial note lay on a low slate table, marked with his aggressive, slashing script. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a deep, supple leather sofa that faced the fire and the breathtaking view. She sat, perching on the edge, her spine straight. He didn't sit opposite her. He sat beside her, his large body taking up space, his heat a palpable force. The scent of him, bergamot, pine, pure male, enveloped her, more potent here in his den. He picked up the papers. "Here," he said, his finger tapping a paragraph. "You call the struggle symbolic of internal conflict. It's not. It is the conflict. The external is a mirror of the internal. There is no separation." His gaze lifted from the page to her face. "You're still intellectualizing. You need to feel it." "And how do you propose I do that?" she asked, her voice tighter than she intended. He watched her, his eyes dark and unblinking in the firelight. "Stop fighting your own instincts." He moved then, not suddenly, but with a deliberate, fluid grace that was utterly predatory. He shifted on the couch, turning his body fully towards her, one arm resting along the back, his fingers just inches from her shoulder. The space between them vanished, filled with the crackle of the fire and the heavy, charged silence. "You're here, in my home, after dark," he stated, his voice dropping to that intimate, gravelly register that made her stomach clench. "You knew it wasn't about the note. Why did you come, Rose?" This was the precipice. The professional facade was gone, burned away by the fire and his proximity. She could retreat, hide behind her plan, and be exposed as a fraud. Or she could meet him on this new, dangerous ground. She lifted her eyes to his, the fire reflecting in their depths. For the same reason you invited me. A slow, dark smile touched his lips. And what reason is that? Clarity, she whispered. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air grew thick, almost too heavy to breathe. The predator-prey dynamic was so palpable she could taste it metallic, like blood on the tongue. He was giving her every chance to run, to show her fear. She held her ground, her blood singing with a terrifying exhilaration. His hand, which had been resting on the sofa back, lifted. He didn't grab her, he didn't pull her. He moved with an agonizing slowness, giving her every opportunity to flinch away. His fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, the calloused pad of his thumb grazing her skin. It was the barest touch, but it sent a jolt of pure lightning through her system. Her breath hitched, a soft, involuntary sound. His eyes flashed with that feral gold, hearing it, scenting her reaction. His thumb didn't leave her skin. It traced a slow, burning path along her cheekbone, down the line of her jaw. It was a touch of possession, of assessment. An alpha testing the mettle of a potential mate. You tremble, he murmured, his thumb pausing just beneath her chin, tilting her face up to his. But you don't pull away. She couldn't have if she wanted to. She was mesmerized, caught in the gravity of him. This was no longer about revenge. This was about the man, the wolf, the raw, untamed power he represented. The hunger he spoke of, she felt it now. A hollow, aching need in the pit of her own stomach. Is this part of the lesson? She breathed. Her world reduced to the point where his skin met hers. This is the only lesson that matters, he growled softly. He leaned in, closing the final, infinitesimal distance. This time, there was no testing brush. His lips captured hers in a kiss that was not gentle, but devastatingly deliberate. It was a kiss of claiming, of conquest, and of a raw, barely restrained hunger that stole the air from her lungs. His hand slid from her jaw into her hair, cupping the back of her head, holding her firm but not forceful, a silent demand for her surrender. And surrender she did. A small, broken sound escaped her as her eyes fluttered closed. Her hands, which had been clenched in her lap, rose of their own volition, her fingers splaying against the crisp cotton of his shirt. The feel of the hard, warm muscle beneath was a new kind of shock. She kissed him back, not with the practiced skill she'd used with Liam, but with a desperate, honest fervor that was all the more powerful for its innocence. He responded with a low, approving growl that vibrated from his chest into hers. The kiss deepened, becoming a languid, exploring fire. He tasted of expensive whiskey and the wild, untamed essence that was uniquely him. It was a taste of the forest under a full moon, of power, of a danger so exquisite she never wanted it to end. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her from the edge of the couch and flush against the solid, unyielding wall of his body. She was surrounded by him, enveloped in his heat, his strength, his scent. One of his hands slid from her back down to the curve of her hip, his large palm branding her through the fabric of her dress. The intimacy of that touch, the sheer possessive weight of it, made her dizzy. This was no longer a game. This was a precipice. And she was willingly, joyfully, stepping off the edge. When he finally broke the kiss, it was only far enough to rest his forehead against hers. Their breath mingled, ragged and uneven. His eyes were pure, molten gold, the wolf right there at the surface, staring at the woman in his arms. The revisions, he said, his voice a ragged whisper against her lips, the words a stark contrast to the intimacy they were still wrapped in. I want them by noon tomorrow. He was drawing a line, showing her he was in control of the tempo, of the hunt. He had brought her to the edge of the claim, let her feel the dizzying fall, and then deliberately paused the descent. Slowly, reluctantly, his arms loosened their hold. He didn't push her away, but the space he created felt like a chasm. Rose slid back to her corner of the sofa, her body humming, her lips swollen, her mind a riot of sensation and emotion. He stood, a king who had just tasted his victory and was in no hurry to claim the rest. Alara will see you out. Rose stood on impossibly shaky legs, the ghost of his touch burning on her skin, the taste of him forever imprinted on her soul. She had come to play a game of vengeance, but she was learning the rules were written in blood and fire. And as she walked away from him, her body aching with a need so profound it felt like a new kind of truth, she knew with terrifying certainty that she no longer cared about winning the game. She just wanted more. The world had shifted on its axis. The drive home from Dave's house was a blur of streetlights and sensation, Rose's fingers periodically lifting to trace her swollen lips, as if to confirm the reality of what had happened. The taste of him, whiskey and wildness, was a ghost on her tongue. The feel of his hands, one tangled in her hair, the other possessive on her hip, was branded into her skin. The ice in her chest was gone, replaced by a banked fire that threatened to roar into an inferno with a single memory. He kissed me. Not as part of a game, not as a manipulation. It was a claiming. And she had kissed him back with a desperation that stripped her bare. The plan for revenge felt like a childish fantasy scribbled in the margins of a textbook, while the real lesson was being written in fire on her soul. She didn't sleep. She sat at her laptop in the dark, the city lights her only companion, and rewrote the curatorial note. This time, the words didn't come from an academic place. They came from the raw, exposed nerve he had touched. She wrote of the hunger, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing entity. She wrote of the clash not as a symbol, but as a biological imperative. She wrote of the beauty in the savagery, because she had just experienced a taste of it. She sent the file at 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes before his deadline. Her message was as stark as his had been. The revisions. No salutation, no sign-off. A mirror of his own command. Let him make of that what he would. The response was immediate. Not about the note. From David Blackwood. Subject: The Kensington Gala. You will accompany me to the Kensington Gallery opening tonight. 8 p.m. I will send a car. The Kensington. The most exclusive old money gallery in the city. An event where the human and werewolf elite mingled in a delicate, poisonous dance. An event where Liam would undoubtedly be, with Violet on his arm. This was no longer a private lesson. This was a public declaration. He was taking her into the heart of their shared world and forcing a confrontation. He was testing her in a new arena. The car that arrived was a silent, black luxury sedan. The driver held the door for her without a word. When she arrived at the gallery, a sleek, stone building tucked away on a cobblestone street, Ilara was waiting, her expression as impassive as ever. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting inside," she said, her gaze sweeping over Rose's simple, elegant black gown, a deliberate choice of armor. "I would advise you to remember that every eye in that room will be on you. Every word will be dissected. Every reaction will be noted." "I'm well aware," Rose said, her voice cool. "Are you?" Ilara's gaze was piercing. "They will not see an art historian. They will see a human his son discarded. They will see a challenge to the natural order. They will be asking one question: are you his new mistress or his next meal?" Before Rose could retort, Ilara turned and led her inside. The gallery was a whirl of crystal, champagne, and murmured conversation that died the moment she stepped over the threshold. The air was thick with a dozen competing perfumes, but beneath it, Rose could now detect the sharper, wilder scent of werewolf. It was a low, thrumming presence in the room, a current of primal energy beneath the civilized veneer. And then she saw him. Dave stood near a massive abstract painting, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was surrounded by a circle of powerful-looking men and women, but he was the undeniable center of gravity. His eyes found hers instantly across the crowded room, a spark of that feral gold in the dim light. He didn't smile. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a summons. She began to walk towards him, feeling the weight of hundreds of stares. She heard the hissed whispers. "Is that her? The one Liam? What is Dave thinking?" She kept her chin high, her gaze fixed on him, using his presence as an anchor in the storm of judgment. She was halfway to him when a hand closed around her upper arm, tight enough to bruise. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Liam's voice was a low, venomous snarl in her ear. She turned, wrenching her arm from his grasp. He stood there, handsome and furious, with Violet clinging to his other arm, her face a mask of triumphant spite. "I was invited," Rose said, her voice carrying in the sudden hush around them. "By who? My father?" Liam laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're making a fool of yourself, Rose. And of me. This pathetic little display ends now. Leave. She isn't going anywhere." Dave's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He had moved, soundlessly, to stand just behind Rose's shoulder. His presence was a shield, a fortress. He didn't touch her, but he didn't need to. His proximity was a declaration louder than any words. Liam took an involuntary step back, his face paling. "Father, this is a public event," Dave interrupted, his tone lethally calm. "And Miss Valerian is my guest. You will afford her the respect that position entails, or you will leave. The choice is yours. The challenge hung in the air. The entire gallery was watching. A silent, eager audience to this power struggle. Liam's jaw worked, his eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and rage. He was being publicly neutered by his own father. For her, Violet, sensing his weakness, tightened her grip on his arm. "Liam, darling, perhaps we should—" "We're staying." Liam gritted out, his eyes promising murder to Rose. Dave's attention shifted to Rose, his gaze softening infinitesimally. "The piece in the next room is one you'll appreciate. The use of color is aggressive." He offered her his arm. It was a command, a benediction, and a gauntlet thrown all at once. Without a second glance at Liam and Violet, Rose placed her hand on his offered arm. The feel of the hard muscle beneath the fine wool of his suit was an electric shock. A collective, subtle gasp rippled through the crowd. As he led her away, he leaned down, his lips close to her ear, his breath a warm caress that made her shiver. "You see?" he murmured, his voice for her alone. "The first rule of the hunt. Never show fear to a rival. It only makes them hungrier." He led her towards the next exhibit, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. Rose walked beside him, her hand on his arm, the scent of scandal and his intoxicating cologne filling her senses. The revenge she had planned felt small and petty. This the public claiming, the humiliated fury on Liam's face, the terrifying, thrilling rightness of her hand on Dave's arm. This was a different kind of power altogether, and it was a power she was learning to crave. The world had narrowed to the solid strength of Dave's arm beneath her hand and the searing heat of his body beside her. They moved through the gallery, a silent, formidable unit, leaving a wake of stunned whispers in their path. Rose no longer heard the individual words. They had merged into a single hum of shock and speculation. She was acutely aware of Liam's furious gaze burning a hole between her shoulder blades, but it felt distant, unimportant. The only thing that was real was the man guiding her through the crowd. He stopped before a massive canvas, a violent splash of crimson and charcoal black. "Well?" he asked, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "What do you feel?" It was a test, a continuation of their lesson. But the context had changed. They were no longer in the sterile silence of his viewing gallery. They were on a battlefield, and he was asking her to analyze the art while the war raged around them. She looked at the painting, at the raw, angry slashes of color. She let the emotions of the night, the shock of his kiss, the thrill of his public defense, the lingering fury at Liam wash over her. "It feels like rage," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Not hot rage, cold rage, the kind that's been compressed under immense pressure until it becomes a diamond. Hard, sharp, and brilliant." He was silent for a moment, studying the painting as if seeing it through her eyes. "Perceptive," he finally said. The artist lost his mate. This was his first piece after. The statement was a gift. A piece of his world, handed to her without ceremony. It made the painting infinitely more tragic, more profound. It was no longer just pigment on canvas. It was a werewolf's heartbreak, immortalized. He led her on, pausing to speak with a silver-haired industrialist, introducing her simply as Rose Valerian, the art historian consulting on the modern mythos' acquisition. The respect in the man's eyes was immediate, directed at her, not as an appendage, but as a professional. Dave was strategically rebuilding her identity in front of everyone, brick by brick. They finally reached a quieter corner of the gallery, a small alcove partially shielded by a freestanding sculpture. The relative silence was a relief. Dave retrieved 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, and the simple contact sent a fresh jolt through her system. "You're handling this well," he observed, his eyes scanning the room, ever watchful. "Did you expect me to crumble?" she asked, taking a sip of the cool, bubbly wine. "I expected a performance," he said, his gaze returning to hers. "A mask of bravery. But this isn't an act, is it? You're not afraid of them." She held his stare, the memory of his kiss a brand on her lips. "Should I be?" A slow, dangerous smile touched his mouth. "No, but you should be afraid of what this means. There's no going back from this, Rose. The pack has seen you with me. They've seen me choose you over my own blood. You are now a permanent fixture in their landscape. A threat to some, a prize to others. And to you?" The question slipped out, bold and unedited. His smile vanished, replaced by that intense, predatory focus. "To me, you are a question that hasn't yet been fully answered." Before she could respond, A smooth, oily voice cut through the alcove's privacy. "David! There you are. And this must be the remarkable Miss Valerian." A man approached, tall and lean, with hair the color of ash and eyes that were a pale, unsettling blue. He moved with a languid grace that set Rose's teeth on edge. This was a different kind of predator. "Silas," Dave acknowledged, his tone cooling several degrees. A clear warning. Silas's gaze swept over Rose with an appraising thoroughness that felt violating. "The talk of the town. The human who tamed the great Dave Blackwood." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Or is it the other way around?" "Rose is consulting on the Foundation's latest acquisition," Dave said, his voice dropping into a territorial growl. "Her expertise is unparalleled." "I'm sure it is," Silas purred, his eyes lingering on Rose's face. "In many areas." He took a step closer, ignoring Dave's escalating tension. "Tell me, my dear, are you aware of the Blackwood history? Such a turbulent bloodline. All that power, it has a tendency to destroy fragile things." Dave moved then, so fast it was a blur. He didn't touch Silas, but he placed his body squarely between the man and Rose, his back to her, shielding her completely. The air around them seemed to crackle with unleashed energy. "You are overstepping, Silas." Dave's voice was a soft, deadly whisper. "Walk away." The threat was absolute. For a long moment, the two men stared each other down, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Silas's thin lips stretched into a smirk. "Of course. My apologies. I was merely curious." He gave a mocking little bow and melted back into the crowd. Dave didn't turn around immediately. His shoulders were tense, his entire body radiating a protective fury that was more potent than any kiss. When he finally faced her, his eyes were blazing gold. "Who was that?" Rose asked, her heart still pounding. "Silas Thorne, the alpha of a rival pack. An enemy." He bit out. His hand came up, his thumb stroking over her cheek where Silas's gaze had felt like a physical touch, as if he could wipe the man's presence away. "He will be dealt with." The possessiveness in his touch, in his words, should have frightened her. Instead, it fed the fire inside her. He was claiming her not just from Liam, but from the world. "I told you," he murmured, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb resting on her pulse point, feeling its frantic beat. "You are either rising or falling. After tonight, there is no middle ground. They all see it." His gaze dropped to her lips. "Do you?" The gallery, the people, the threat of Silas, it all faded into a distant buzz. There was only him, and the terrifying, exhilarating truth. "Yes," she breathed. The word was a surrender and an acceptance. It was the answer to his unspoken question. She was not a mistress or a meal. She was his. The gold in his eyes flared, a silent, savage victory. He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to. The promise of what was to come was written in the possessive set of his jaw, in the heat of his hand on her skin. The public declaration was over. The private war for her soul had just begun, and as she looked into the eyes of the wolf who had claimed her, Rose knew, with a shiver of primal anticipation, that she had already lost, and she had never wanted anything more. The drive back to his estate was a silence so thick with tension, it felt like a physical presence in the car. Dave hadn't spoken a word since they left the gallery, his profile a stark, brooding sculpture in the dim light of the back seat. The energy rolling off him was no longer that of the controlled CEO or the calculating alpha. It was something wilder, a storm barely contained. Rose sat beside him, her body still humming from the confrontation, from the look of absolute possession in his eyes. The fire he had ignited in her was now a conflagration, and the careful architecture of her revenge plan had crumbled to ash. She was acting on instinct now, a raw, primal need that mirrored his own. The car pulled through the imposing gates and up the long, winding drive. He didn't wait for the driver to open his door. He was out in a fluid motion, his hand closing around hers, pulling her from the car and up to the steps to the massive front door. There was no pretense. This was just pure, unadulterated claiming. He led her not to the living room, but through the dark house, his strides long and purposeful, to set a double doors she hadn't seen before. He pushed them open, revealing his bedroom. It was a reflection of the man himself, vast, minimalist, and powerful. A wall of glass looked out over the moonlit canyon, the only light a silvery wash that painted everything in shades of gray and shadow. The centerpiece was a massive, low-slung bed, a dark expanse of linens. He released her hand only to close the doors behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the spacious room. Then he turned to her. his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that was not quite human. The civilized veneer was gone, stripped away by the events of the night. Here, in his innermost sanctum, he was just the wolf. "Do you have any idea?" he began, his voice a ragged, guttural thing that scrapped against her senses. "What you have done to me?" Rose stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Enlighten me." He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, not touching her, but crowding her, his heat searing her. "From the first moment I saw you with him, I knew. I saw the fire in you, the strength he was too much of a fool to recognize. It called to the beast in me, a siren's song I tried to ignore." His hands came up, framing her face, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the ferocity in his eyes. "When he betrayed you, a part of me was glad." It was a savage, dishonorable thought, but it was the truth, because it meant you were free. It meant I could look, I could want. His thumb stroked her cheekbones, his gaze burning into hers. "But it wasn't enough. This game you started, this plan for vengeance. I saw it in your eyes that first night, and I decided I would play. I would let you think you were manipulating me, because I kept you near." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "But you have consumed me, Rose. You are in my blood, in my breath. Think of your scent when you're not there. I hear the sound of your voice in the silence. This is no longer a game for me. It's an obsession. You are my obsession." The confession was raw, brutal in its honesty. It was everything she had wanted to hear when she'd first concocted her plan. But now, hearing it, terrified her with intensity. This was no longer about hurting Liam. This was about a man, a beast, laying his soul bare. "Dave," she whispered, her own resolve shattering. That was all the invitation he needed. His mouth captured hers in a kiss that was nothing like the one before. This was not a question or a test. It was a claiming, absolute and final. His hands slid from her face, down to her back, pulling her flush against the hard, unyielding length of his body. She could feel the powerful beat of his heart against his chest, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. Her arms wound around his neck, her fingers tangling in the dark silk of his hair, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with a desperation that matched his, all thought, all reason incinerated in the heat between them. With a low growl that vibrated through her entire body, he walked her backward until her legs hit the edge of the bed. He broke the kiss, his eyes molten gold in the moonlight, his chest heaving. "Tell me you want this," he demanded, his voice rough with a need to profound. It shook her. "Tell me you are mine." She looked up at him, at this powerful, obsessed man who saw the true her, and in that moment, there was no other truth. "I am yours." The words were her surrender, and his victory. He lowered her onto the cool, dark sheets, his body covering hers, a welcome weight. Clothes became a frustrating barrier, discarded with impatient, fumbling hands until there was nothing between them but skin and moonlight. His hands were everywhere, mapping her body with a reverence that belied the ferocity of his need. The curve of her waist, the swell of her hip, the sensitive skin of her inner thigh. When he entered her, it was with a slow, intentional pressure that made her cry out, her nails digging on the hard muscles of his back. He stilled, his body trembling with the effort of his restraint, his forehead damp against hers. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice a strained whisper. She opened her eyes, meeting his burning gaze. In their depths, she saw the man and the wolf, both utterly consumed by her. Then he began to move, and the world dissolved into sensation. It was a collision of 2 storms, a desperate, hungry coupling that was as much about soul as it was about body. Each thrust was a punctuation of his confession. Obsession, need, mine. She met him thrust for thrust, her own whimpers and moans a silent litany of her surrender. He shifted her, his hands gripping her hips, angling her to take him deeper, and she saw the starts behind her eyelids. The pleasure was a rising tide, sharp and overwhelming, building with every snap of his hips, every possessive growl that rumbled from his chest. She was completely at his mercy, and it was the most liberating feeling she had ever known. When her climax broke, it was a silent scream, a shattering of her very self that she felt from the tips of her toes to the crown of her head. He followed her over the edge moments later, his own release a guttural roar of her name against her neck, his body bowing as she spilled his seed deep within her. For a long time, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing in the moonlit room. He collapsed beside her, his arm snug possessively over her waist, her back against the solid warmth of his chest. His lips brushed her shoulder, a soft, lingering touch. The silence was no longer tense. It was sated, profound. Rose lay in the circle of his arms, the reality of what has just happened settling over her. The plan was gone. The revenge was irrelevant. She had gone to break the sun, and instead been utterly claimed by the father. And as she felt Nis breathing even out into sleep, his body curled protectively against hers, she knew with a certainty that settled deep into her bones. She wouldn't have it any other way. The first light of dawn was a pale, hesitant brushstroke against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dave's bedroom. Rose watched it, mesmerized by the slow reveal of the room, the rumpled silk sheets, the discarded clothing trailing a path from the door, the stark, masculine lines of the furniture that had witnessed the shattering of her old life. Her body was a map of new sensations. A pleasant, deep ache lingered in her muscles, a testament to the raw, unrestrained power of the man sleeping beside her. The memory of the night was a visceral, sensory overload, the feel of his calloused hands exploring her skin, the low, guttural growls that had vibrated against her throat, the shocking, perfect fit of their bodies moving together in a rhythm that was as ancient as the moon. It had been nothing like the practiced, almost transactional sex with Liam. This had been a claiming, a consumption, a storm she had willingly been swept into. Now, in the quiet aftermath, she felt altered. The plan for revenge was a ghost, a wisp of smoke from a fire that had been utterly consumed by a volcano. This was no longer about Liam. This was about the primal connection that had fused her to the man beside her. She was in the wolf's den, and she had curled up in his bed, not as a captive, but as a willing accomplice. She felt him stir. His arm, which was draped heavily over her waist, tightened, pulling her back against the solid, warm wall of his chest. His face nuzzled into her hair, and she felt the rumble of a contented, sleepy sound deep in his throat. It was an intimacy more profound than the sex itself, this unguarded, possessive comfort in her presence. "You're awake." His voice was rough with sleep, a low vibration against her spine. "The sun's rising," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly would break the spell. He shifted, rolling her onto her back so he could look down at her. In the soft, gray light, his features were less severe, the lines of his face relaxed, but his eyes were still intense, studying her with a focus that made her breath catch. He traced the line of her collarbone with a single finger, a slow, proprietary touch. "No regrets?" he asked. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. How could she regret it? The emptiness Liam had left was gone, filled with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. She was bound to the most powerful man she had ever known by something far stronger than a desire for revenge. It was a bond of flesh, of fire, of a shared, dangerous understanding. "No," she said, her voice firm. "No regrets." A satisfied gleam lit his eyes. He leaned down and kissed her, not with the devouring hunger of the night before, but with a slow, deep possession that felt like a seal on a pact. When he pulled away, his expression grew serious. "What happens now?" he began, his thumb stroking her lower lip. "It will not be easy. Liam will be volatile. The pack will be divided. Silas and others like him will see you as a vulnerability, a way to get to me. I'm not afraid of them," she said, and she meant it. Lying in his bed, with the scent of their lovemaking on the sheets and the memory of his power wrapped around her, fear felt like a foreign country. "You should be," he said, his voice dropping to that deadly soft tone. "But you will be protected. You are mine now, Rose. That comes with my name, my resources, and the full, unyielding protection of my pack. But it also comes with a target on your back. You are mine." The words should have felt constricting. Instead, they felt like a liberation. She had spent her life belonging to no one, fighting for every scrap of respect and security. To belong to a man like Dave Blackwood, to be claimed so utterly and completely, was to be anchored in the heart of the storm. It was the safest and most dangerous place she could possibly be. "I can handle it," she said, lifting her chin. He smiled then, a true, devastating smile that transformed his face. It was the smile of a king welcoming a queen to his side. "I know you can." The moment was shattered by the sharp, insistent buzz of his phone on the nightstand. He ignored it, his gaze still locked on hers. It buzzed again, more urgently. With a low growl of annoyance, he reached for it. He read the message, and his entire body went still. The relaxed, sated man of a moment ago was gone. replaced by the hard-edged alpha. The gold in his eyes flared, not with desire, but with cold fury. "What is it?" Rose asked, sitting up, the sheets pooling around her waist. He didn't answer immediately. He threw back the covers and stood, a powerful, naked silhouette against the brightening window. The sight of him, all coiled muscle and simmering rage, was both terrifying and breathtaking. "It seems my son has chosen his path," he said, his voice dangerously calm. He turned the phone screen toward her. The image was a paparazzi shot, taken last night outside the gallery. It was of the moment Dave had placed himself between her and Silas Thorne. The angle made it look even more protective, more intimate. The headline screamed, "Blackwood heir's scorned lover captivates Alpha. Power struggles ignites." Liam had leaked it. He had thrown the first public, undeniable stone, trying to turn the pack against his father by painting Rose as a divisive seductress. Dave's phone buzzed again. He read the new message, his jaw tightening. "The Council of Elders has called an emergency meeting. They demand my presence. And yours." The real world, with all its brutal politics and deadly consequences, came crashing back in. The sanctuary of the bedroom was an illusion. The war was here. Rose met his gaze, the fire in her veins banked but ready. She was no longer the woman seeking revenge, or the art historian playing a dangerous game. She was the woman who had been claimed by the Alpha. She threw back the sheets and stood, naked and unashamed before him. "Then let's go," she said, her voice as steady as his. "Let them see what you've chosen." The look he gave her was one of fierce, unadulterated pride. The hunt was far from over, but the prey had vanished. In its place stood a partner, ready to face the howling dawn at his side.